So today we're doing a class overview video based on the official hardcore series, covering every class's strength and weakness as they relate to one life servers, covering which abilities the class has access to which are important for survival, and we're also going to be giving each class a rating out of 5 stars based on solo gameplay, group gameplay and survival to give you an indicator on how good each class is for hardcore classic WoW. This will be quite a long video, as we do go into every single class in the game. The video will be divided into chapters so you can easily navigate to the class or classes that you are interested in, but without further ado, let's get into it. Hunters, one of the easiest classes for hardcore classic WoW, or at least so I've heard. Apparently, someone has completed the entire hardcore challenge as a hunter without ever taking a single point of damage. That is how easy it's supposed to be. Memes aside, today we are taking a look and talking about the hunter class as it relates to hardcore servers in classic WoW, and how good or bad hunters can be for hardcore. Throughout this video, I will go over the class's pros and cons, as well as an overview of your important abilities that are helpful for hardcore, and at the end I will also give the class a rating based on some important metrics. So, hardcore servers are servers where you only have one life, which means survival means everything. As a hunter, once you reach level 10 you get access to a pet companion that will fight by your side, and you can even teach your pet taunt so that it will keep aggro for you while fighting. I believe it should speak for itself why, like when you have a pet and you only have one life, having a personal tank with you at all times is incredibly valuable. By speccing into Beast Mastery, you can even make your pet even better both in terms of survival and damage output, making it an absolute beast, pun intended. More damage means your pet will keep aggro better as well outside of taunt cooldowns, and as long as you play carefully, there's pretty much nothing scary that ever happens to you as a hunter while you're leveling. The one thing worth mentioning here is that from level 1 to level 10 will probably be one of your biggest challenges as a hunter, and during the launch of the hardcore servers, this is also where you will see the differences between a good or a bad hunter. A good hunter will be one of the first level 10s on the server, while a bad hunter will be one of the last level 10s on the server. Hunters have a very low skill floor, but a very high skill ceiling. What this means is that on a base level, playing a hunter is incredibly easy. That being said, the differences between a regular hunter and a good hunter is absolute night and day, both while leveling and at max level. Like I just said, a good hunter will be among the first level 10s on a server, while a bad hunter will be among one of the slowest levelers. Likewise, at max level, a bad hunter will be the reason why your group wipes and dies, while a good hunter would save that group. For max level, there's not much I can personally do to help you reach that skill ceiling, but for leveling there are 2 big tips that I can give you that will help increase your efficiency by quite a bit. Number 1 is download a melee swing timer or a weapon swing timer add-on. That way you can weave your melee hits in between your auto shots. Good hunters use this to weave one melee hit in between every auto shot, and this increases your damage by a lot. Basically, doubling your efficiency by itself, and you can start killing 2 mobs at a time even while leveling. Keep one mob in melee range and melee weave it, and keep the other mob at range length and use auto shot. Number 2, use mob pathing to your advantage. Fence kite if you have a fence available, otherwise kite around a big tree or use ledges on a building. This way you can always hit the mob with ranged attacks by just abusing mob pathing. One example is this building right here in Teldrassil for you Night Elf hunters out there, but basically just use any mob pathing in the open world like this to keep mobs out of range so you can pump maximum ranged damage. Hunters are an incredible class for hardcore because it fits pretty much everyone. Whether you want to take it slow and steady and play it safe all the way, or if you want to pump and level fast, hunters are a good choice either way. Also, whether you're a solo player or a group player, hunters can be good and are good in both scenarios. Hunters also have the incredible upside of not being very gear dependent. Just like feral druids, The one upgrade you somewhat care about as a hunter is your bow or gun upgrade, basically your ranged weapon, and when spec'd into Beast Mastery, even that upgrade doesn't matter as much as it would for many other classes. While you do want upgrades, and upgrades are always amazing to get, what I'm saying is that hunters can definitely survive without as many upgrades as a melee class would need. So let's go through some hunter abilities that are worth talking about, and this list will be somewhat short, but I'm keeping it mainly the most important abilities, and I'm also excluding pet abilities, but keep in mind pets can charge, taunt, screech, reduce enemy damage, silence, and so on. Number 1, Aspect of the Cheetah. This ability is insane for both hardcore, leveling, and a fresh environment. Movement speed is always nice, you can use it to increase your efficiency while leveling, because running will be a huge part of your leveling experience, or you can use it to run away from mobs if you need to get away. Concussive Shot, keeping mobs away from you by slowing them down. This one has a pretty short cooldown and hunters are incredible at slowing and kiting mobs without ever letting them into melee range. Distracting Shot, allowing you to juggle a threat between you and your pet if necessary. Scare Beasts, not too much to say about this one, but can be useful in certain scenarios. Freezing Trap, useful for CC but also for survival. Feign Death, an ability you can use to survive pretty much most scenarios that would otherwise result in certain death. Wyvern Sting, allowing you to put a target to sleep and also dealing damage over time upon waking up. And Wing Clip, a melee ability allowing you to slow down mobs, so even if you get a mob within melee range, you can slow down the mob, run away, and keep pumping range damage. All of these abilities combined will help you deal with any situation, pump out maximum damage, keep enemies at range, slow them down, speed yourself up, and feign death if you need to escape a very dangerous scenario. All of this being said, let's get into some ratings for the hunter. For solo gameplay, hunters are a pretty obvious 5 out of 5 stars in my opinion. Having a personal tank with insane damage output and incredible survival, through your hunter pet and speccing Beast Mastery, you can handle just about anything in the open world while leveling, both normal mobs and elites. Pretty much anything is soloable as a hunter. For group gameplay, this is where it gets a little bit more tricky, referring back to previous in this video where I said a bad hunter would be the reason why your dungeon group wipes, while a good hunter would be the reason why your dungeon group survives. This is where your personal skill ceiling comes into play. A bad hunter in a dungeon group would be a 1 out of 5 stars, maybe a 2, while a very good hunter would be a 5 out of 5 stars. For that reason, I will meet in the middle ground and give it a 3 out of 5, while also verbally stating that it has the potential to go up and down from this rating based on your personal skill. Hunters do bring a lot to the table in groups. First of all, having that pet offers a chance of having an off tank ready at any times, plus you can use the hunter pet to pull mobs if or when necessary, or off tank in big pulls. On top of that, you also offer crowd control and slowing abilities. You can use Trank Shot, Viper Sting to drain mana, but you also have the usual hunter memes, where a dungeon group wipes due to a hunter pull. Lastly, for survival, I give hunters 5 out of 5 stars again. Having a personal tank, you can always keep your main target away from you at any times while dealing damage from max range, and if you happen to butt pull another mob on you, then you can wing clip into Scatter Shot and then run away for them to concussive shot it and keep it slowed. Alternatively, you can use a frost trap on it or even feign death. You also have movement speed increase from Aspect of the Cheetah, so even running away is fast as a hunter. The only thing you really don't have is self-healing. So overall, Hunter is a very good class to play for hardcore, especially while leveling. Now it's time to talk about the one class that I personally have at level 60 in Classic WoW Hardcore, the Druid. In this video, we will go over the pros and cons of the Druid class as it relates to hardcore servers in Classic WoW. We will go through the Druid's abilities which are relevant for hardcore, how good the class actually is, and give it a rating for solo gameplay, group gameplay, and survival. The Druid is actually an insane class for hardcore, especially for leveling. Being a hybrid class, you have access to tanking spells and tanking abilities to keep aggro and reduce damage taken, you have self-healing through restoration abilities, you have melee damage, and you have ranged damage output, which allows you to, which you can use whenever necessary. Having the ability to do both melee and ranged damage is actually an insane edge over any other melee classes, as you can use something like Moonfire to tag and pull a mob out of other mobs in a crowded area. Plus, if it's a caster, you can simply cast Wrath on him until he dies, or pull him out by line of sighting or outranging. Having access to Bear Form and Thorns, you can effectively pull 2 to 3 to 4 mobs in one pull and damage them all down quite effectively, especially when you get access to Swipe, increasing your efficiency by a lot as well. One thing that is particularly good about Druids in hardcore is that you are not really gear dependent at all. You never have to care about looking for weapon upgrades to increase your damage output, because if you level as a feral Druid, which most people do in classic hardcore anyway, then your weapon is only a stat stick, meaning weapon damage is basically useless for you, allowing you to pump maximum damage 24/7 and never feeling undergeared for your current content. You also have little to no downtime, especially as you progress through your levels, and you get access to things like power shifting when you get the Wolf's Head Helm, and you also get Omen of Clarity from Talent Points, which gives you free healing, which means the only mana usage you will use is going back into cat form after using that Omen heal. Having little to no downtime means that you can chain pull mobs back to back, and it just feels both safe and efficient at the same time, two very important factors for leveling when you only have one life. One more addition to the Druids is that you get access to both Feline Swiftness and Travel Form. Feline Swiftness will give you plus 30% movement speed in cat form when you put both talents into it, and at level 30 you also get Travel Form for that plus 40%, giving you a massive movement speed increase before that mount at level 40. And the reason why I mention this is because hardcore servers will offer a fresh environment, and walking is a big part of the classic WoW leveling experience, so having this movement speed bonus will increase your leveling speed by way more than you might think, allowing you to get ahead of the pack on launch. Playing as a Druid, you feel pretty much safe 24/7, even if you're feral and play in melee range. The reason is because you have so many abilities at your disposal which will help you out for survival. If things are looking scary, you can simply root the mob and run away, and having access to self-healing is huge, and cannot be stated enough how important that is. The Druid does have a couple of downsides which I'll mention really quickly. If you want to do your class quest for the Sunken Temple, this one requires you to tag a Devil Sword in Ungoro. You can simply root and hibernate the Devil Sword then run away, but the Devil Swords are actually pretty fast, so you might have to use dash. The only reason I mention this is because I was really scared when I leveled my own Druid, and I just want you to be prepared. For max level content, you will pretty much be stuck with two options, tanking or healing, and in both those scenarios, a raid setup will most likely only want one of each, as you usually don't stack Druids. This could be a positive or a negative. On one hand, the demand for Druids at max level is not that high, but on the other hand, if a Druid item drops, you will most likely get it, because there's not that much competition. A Druid will have his full tier set months before most warriors and rogues will, that's for sure. Alternatively, Feral Druid DPS is not bad at max level either, but due to how vanilla WoW is designed, you will be sitting in Nomuragan farming that crowd pummeler for just about 6 hours every single day, and you will need to spend thousands of gold every single month on consumables, as you will be chugging mana potions and mana flasks, just in order to be competitive on the DPS output. That being said, if you actually can be bothered jumping through all those hoops, Feral Druids can actually be top DPS. So, let's get into some Druid abilities. Number 1, Entangling Roots. If I had to choose one Druid ability, which is the most important, this is probably the one. This one can be used as a survival ability by rooting a mob in place, then run away. Alternatively, if you pull 2 mobs but only want to handle one at a time, just root one of them and pull the other one slightly out of melee range. But also, Druids can use Entangling Roots to solo just about any elite mob in the open world, as long as it is outside and not in a cave or in a building. Simply root, run out of range, then reroute as the timer runs out, and repeat this process. It is a very tedious way to solo an elite, and it will take time, but it's an incredibly easy way to solo any mob that you want to. Feline Swiftness for increased movement speed in cat form. This is a talent you get access to around level 20. Travel form at level 30 for even more movement speed. Moonfire, this one can be used to tag mobs incredibly fast, which is insanely important in a fresh environment, and this one can also be used to kite and kill mobs. Hibernate, this one can, it's literally just a crowd control ability for beasts, but it is pretty useful in zones like Ungoro and other zones. Accidentally pulled a devil sword? Well, just hibernate it. Dash, a sprint ability to run away. Thorns, dealing damage back to attackers upon attacking you. Innervate, once you get access to this ability, you literally never have any downtime at all while playing Feral, and every time you go out of mana, Innervate will basically be ready. Self-healing abilities like Regrowth. Demoralizing Roar, not sure how to say that one. Reducing the attack power of nearby mobs, really useful, especially in the lower levels, when you use bear form a lot and want to pull between 2 and 4 mobs at a time to maximize your swipe damage. Prowl, allowing you to stealth past enemies, which is really useful while questing, as this makes you able to stealth past mobs and elites and go straight for a named mob or an objective. Cure Poison, and many mobs will poison you while leveling, which can actually be quite tricky to deal with, as poison damage will break your bandage healing, so having a way to cure poisons is actually pretty nice. And lastly, Bear Form, giving you more armor, more health, less damage taken, pretty nice. So let's get into some ratings. For solo gameplay, it's an obvious 5 out of 5 stars, having leveled a Druid to 60 myself in solo self-found hardcore. It is incredibly safe all the way, you deal good damage, not reliant on weapon upgrades through playing Feral, no downtime, root dangerous mobs, dash to sprint away. It's actually insane how strong Druids can be. For group gameplay, I kind of want to put it at 3 out of 5, but I'm going to go for 4 out of 5. Having the ability to DPS, tank and heal gives it an extra star in my opinion, being able to fill any role at any time. In addition, Feral DPS can both tank and DPS with the same spec, even at max level, so you don't need to respec between tanking and DPSing. That being said, they don't have the highest demand at level 60, you usually only need 1 to 2 of them in a 40-man raid, plus the lack of crowd control stops them from getting a 5 out of 5. For survival, it's back to 5 out of 5 again, referring back to self-healing abilities, roots, dash, movement speed, travel form. Nature's Grasp is a pretty high survival class. Overall, Druid is a very good class for hardcore, and after leveling on myself, it's a lot more fun than I initially thought it would be, and it's definitely worth giving a try. Now it's time to talk about a pretty popular class in Classic WoW, and it's a surprisingly good class for hardcore as well. Well, I guess it shouldn't really be surprising, but yeah, today we're talking about mages in hardcore Classic WoW. In today's video, we will do an overview of the class itself, talk about some abilities the mage has that are relevant for hardcore, touch base on both single target and AoE gameplay, how good it is in the open world versus dungeons, and at the end we will also give the class a rating based on how good it is for hardcore. Mages are actually pretty insane for hardcore and might just be one of the best and easiest, or well, just the best and most wanted classes to play. It really depends on your playstyle. As a mage, there are 2 main playstyles to highlight, and then you have sub-styles within those playstyles. You have single target and AoE. For AoE, you have one that is focused on Blizzard slow kiting, but you also have one focused on a Shatter build with Flame Strike and Arcane Explosions. And for single target, you have viable builds both within Frost and Fire. For the purpose of hardcore and this specific video, I will focus mostly on Frost, as I think that is the spec that most people will level with, and people will play early at max level, while probably respecing to Fire later down the line. Now, what I personally like about the mage is that things will never get scary unless you personally want them to, or unless you are super unlucky. You have so many abilities in your toolkit, many of which you get access to very early in your leveling process, so you are very good even at early levels. For example, you get Frostbolt very early, allowing you to slow down mobs and kite them around, and by using this effectively, mobs should never be able to get within melee range of you. You also get access to Frost Nova and Blink at early levels, so if the mobs do get into melee range, you can then Nova, blink away, then start your Frostbolt kiting all over again. Alternatively, if you're focusing on one mob and then suddenly another one attacks you from behind, you can Frost Nova and blink away. You have so many abilities in your toolkit that can be used both offensively and defensively that will really help you out in your hardcore journey, and let's actually just take a look at some of those abilities that I want to highlight. Frostbolt, one of your first good abilities which you get access to pretty much from the very start, allowing you to slow down mobs. Frost Nova, another ability that you get access to pretty early, allowing you to freeze mobs in place, which allows you to either run away or at least get out of melee range. You also have Blink, allowing you to teleport away. Ice Armor, if enemies hit you with a melee attack, there's a chance they will be slowed down thanks to this Ice Armor, allowing you to outrun them if you need to. Fire Blast, insanely useful for mob tagging, which could be very important for the fresh hardcore servers. Blizzard, allowing you to AoE down mobs, very useful for the well-known Mage AoE farming technique, where you basically just pull a bunch of mobs in one pull, then Blizzard them down. Combine this with the improved Blizzard for insane AoE farming. Then you have Cone of Cold, another AoE ability with a slow effect which can also be very useful for kiting, especially if you use it together with a jump, the so-called jump cone. Basically, jump into the air, turn your character in the air and use Cone of Cold, that way you keep all of your forward momentum. Conjure Water and Conjure Food, allowing you to be self-sufficient on the food and water front, so you don't need to fill up your bags from a vendor before going on a questing journey. Plus, you save yourself some gold along the way by not needing to buy food or water, and you can even make some gold by trading food and drinks to others for a small fee. Evocation, if you ever go out of mana, this ability is pretty insane. Mana Shield, allowing you to use your mana as a barrier, so when the mobs hit you, they drain your mana instead of your health. Ice Barrier, another shield ability that you get access to later in your leveling journey by speccing down the Frost talent tree. Ice Block, providing immunity to damage for a very short time, but also you have to stand still in the ice block. And Cold Snap, allowing you to double Frost Nova if you need to, or quickly reset the cooldown of pretty much any other Frost ability. Polymorph, allowing you to crowd control mobs. This can be useful in many scenarios, like for example if there are 2 mobs in one pool, you can polymorph one while focus killing the other one. Alternatively, you can also use it as a survival ability. To get away if you pulled an elite mob that you can't handle, just polymorph it and run. Teleporting abilities, this can be extremely useful while leveling, as you can juggle between teleports and Hearthstone to go back and forth between locations. For example, at level 45, when you have quests in Tornaris, then suddenly a quest from Tornaris requires you to go to the Hinterlands to pick up a flower. In this case, put your Hearthstone in Tornaris, teleport to Ironforge, fly to the Hinterlands, then Hearthstone back to Tornaris. For regular people, this would be about 25 minutes of flying, but for a mage, it's 1 teleport, 1 Hearthstone, and about 4 minutes of flying, saving yourself at least 20 minutes. On top of this, you also get some passive abilities from talents that are worth knowing about, like for example Frostbite and Permafrost, increasing your freeze and slowing capabilities. By utilizing these abilities, mages really are the kings of any scenario. By speccing into Frostbite, your Frostbolt will have a chance to freeze mobs in place, effectively allowing you single target kiting to kite just about anything, making mages a very strong single target class. That being said, if AoE farming is more your style, then Blizzard with improved Blizzard is absolutely insane. It just requires a little bit of practice, so you know your limits on how many mobs you want to pull per pull. Now, when playing a mage, I like to consider myself a glass cannon. You have insane damage output, both single target and area of effect damage, but you also have very low health and armor values. For example, in Westfall, those gore tusks can literally take you down in 3 hits. That being said, mages do have access to mana shield and ice barriers eventually, making them a lot more tanky, but you also, like if you are unprepared and you don't have any shields on you, you can get taken down pretty quickly. so just keep that in mind. With all of this being said, let's get into some ratings. For solo gameplay, mages get a 5 out of 5 star rating, once again referring back to slowing abilities like Frostbolts to kite mobs around, Frost Nova to freeze them in place, Polymorph for crowd control, Fire Blast for mob tagging, Ice Block for immunity, Cone of Cold for slowing down multiple mobs in one instant cast, Ice Barriers and Mana Barriers for survival, Blink to get out of dangerous scenarios. Mages have an insane toolkit for just about everything. It is, however, worth mentioning that you do lack self-healing, and you are a glass cannon, but it's still 5 out of 5 stars for me. Now for a group setup, another obvious 5 out of 5 stars. Mages pump damage and can top damage both single target and in AoE pools, especially in AoE pools. Mages are insane, and I can't think of a single scenario where you do not want a mage in your group. If you pull too many mobs, a mage can help you blizzard kite mobs to slow them down, while running out to reset as well. It just provides so much. On top of that, you also provide the ability to trade other people food and water. Now for survival, another 5 out of 5 stars. Ice Block for immunity, enough slowing abilities to slow down all of Azeroth, Frost Nova, Blink, you name it. The fact is, mages are pretty insane for hardcore, both while leveling and at max level. You are very good for leveling, everyone wants you in their group, and you are also very good at max level as well. An overall, very good choice. Let's take a look at the Shaman in hardcore classic WoW. Throughout this video, we will do a brief overlook on the Shaman's abilities that are relevant to hardcore gameplay and can help you out in terms of survival, and we will look at the strengths and weaknesses of the Shaman class. To top it all off, we will give it a rating at the end of the video to give you an indicator on how good the class is for hardcore. Shamans are actually surprisingly strong and good for hardcore. I don't know why I add the word surprisingly here. It might be my own personal prejudice by not having played Shaman in Classic WoW before doing my research for this video, and I have to say, playing a Shaman actually feels great. You feel pretty strong during the early levels, and you just feel stronger and stronger as you level up. That sounds pretty logical, but many classes just don't have that natural progression curve. Or they feel good the entire way, or they feel bad the entire way. Shamans start out by being good, and they just get better. To top it all off, they are a hybrid class. Technically, you can tank, heal and damage, even though Shaman tanking is very scuffed and is mostly used as a backup, but you do have a Taunt Totem and the ability to use a shield and abilities that can generate threat. Mostly though, you will probably level as a DPS spec, and if you go elemental, you can also heal through dungeons very effectively, which means you can find dungeon groups while leveling pretty easily by being able to fulfill the role of a healer without needing a pure healing spec. There are a couple of reasons why Shaman feels very strong both while leveling, and personally I really enjoy the hybrid feeling of being both a ranged and melee DPS class. You get access to an ability called the Rockbiter weapon quite early, which will significantly boost your melee damage, so what I usually do is I throw a lightning bolt or two, and then I finish off the mob with some melee attacks, which also allows my mana regeneration to start ticking. This way I have minimal downtime and require less mana breaks. Now to fully understand how powerful the Shaman class can be for hardcore, let's take a look at some of the Shaman's abilities. Number 1. Rockbiter weapon. As I already mentioned, this one increases the physical damage output of your melee weapons, increasing your melee damage. This provides a pretty huge boost at the lower levels. You also have Ghost Wolf. This is an insane movement speed increasing ability, which can even be talented into being an instant cast, allowing you to use this to level up faster by increasing your movement speed on a regular basis, and it also provides you with an escape option if things get scary. Earthbind Totem, allowing you an AoE slow to use for mobs. You can also combine this one with Ghost Wolf so you have it in a way to escape just about everything. Pop Earthbind to slow down all the mobs, then go for Ghost Wolf and run away to safety. You also have Frost Shock, just in case you need to slow down one enemy, and you have Stone Claw Totem, a personal target dummy without needing engineering, incredibly useful for survival. You also have lots of other totems as well, such as the Strength of Earth Totem. For more damage output, you have the Grounding Totem to redirect harmful spells, Poison Cleansing Totem to get rid of poisons, Tremor Totem to get rid of out of fears, and Wind Fury Totem for top DPS. You also have a Cure Poison ability, just in case you don't want to rely on the Poison Cleansing Totem to do the job for you, and you have self-healing abilities like Healing Wave. Purge, allowing you to dispel beneficial buffs from enemies. For example, if an enemy enrages or uses Bloodlust, you can take it away. It is very useful for survival. Water breathing, just so you don't risk dying because you forgot about your breath meter underwater. Now, these are just some of the Shaman's abilities that I thought was worth highlighting. On top of this, they can also pump incredible damage, both sustainable damage and burst damage. The combination of that damage output stacked with self-healing and survival abilities like a personal target dummy from the Stone Claw Totem, as well as the ability of slowing down enemies through both Frost Shock for single target slows and even Earthbind Totem for AoE slows, plus the addition of speeding yourself up with Ghost Wolf, you really have the recipe for success and survival sitting at your hands right here. On top of that, both throughout your leveling process and especially at max level, you know for sure that you are playing a class that will be in high demand. Players always want shamans in their group, even if it's only for those totems. The totems from a shaman provide incredible support, both in terms of abilities like Earthbind, but also by buffing other people's damage output, especially from the Wind Fury totem. So let's get into some class ratings. For solo gameplay, this class gets a 5 out of 5. Having all the abilities you have, it is, like I said, a recipe for survival and success. You can slow down mobs one by one with Frost Shock, AoE slows from Earthbind, Ghost Wolf to speed yourself up, a personal target dummy, self-healing, you can use shield, you pretty much have it all. The one thing I will say is that while I do personally give the class a 5 out of 5, personal skill does matter here, and in order to unlock that 5 out of 5 star rating, you need to utilize all the abilities that you have in your toolkit. For group gameplay, another 5 out of 5 stars. Totems can buff everyone else in your party, meaning you bring a lot of group utility and synergy, plus you can fulfill the role of either a healer or a DPS, meaning you are an incredibly flexible support class. Plus, if you're a DPS, you can pump some pretty good numbers on those DPS meters while also supporting the rest of your group from your totems. For survival, you would never guess it, but another 5 out of 5. Referring back to the same abilities as usual, self-healing, Frost Shock, Earthbind, Ghost Wolf, it's a pretty insane class for survival if you ask me. Now, whenever playing a Shaman, I feel like a strong hybrid between any class. By using a slow two-handed weapon with Rockbiter, you hit just like a warrior would in melee range, but by using faster weapons, alternatively a one-handed weapon, with Wind Fury enhancement, you start feeling more like a rogue, but then you can also go fully caster mode by throwing out lightning bolts and chain lightnings, and you can use Frost Shock to kite mobs around. Plus you have self-healing. It just feels like the perfect class that has just about everything you would want. In raid groups you will also always be wanted just because of the totems that you bring, and one of your primary jobs as a shaman will be to keep a designated set of totems up at all times for your party to take advantage of. This is also a pretty huge boost while leveling, and if dungeon cleaving ever comes back again, the Horde has a massive advantage on melee cleave groups by running a warrior tank, warrior DPS, rogue DPS, and a shaman healer with Wind Fury totem for those massive Wind Fury procs. The shaman is supposed to be the Horde counterpart of the Paladin for the Alliance, and the two key differences are that while both classes are extremely built for supporting their team, Paladin focuses more on survival by reducing threat generated through, for example, Blessing of Salvation, while the Shaman focuses more on increasing damage dealt, as demonstrated through many of the totems increasing the DPS output by your party members. In many cases, having that survivability or support from a Paladin might outweigh the Shaman's totems that are built around increasing DPS output, but the Shaman also has access to things like the Earthbinding totem, which we have mentioned earlier in this video. There's also the saying of the best defense is a good offense, if the mobs they can't kill you if you kill them first. And that's pretty much what I have for the Shaman class. Hopefully you've enjoyed the class overview, and I'll see you in the next one. Now it's time to take a look at the Paladin class in Classic WoW, specifically related to Classic WoW hardcore servers. This is where it starts splitting the factions, as Alliance has access to Paladins, while the Horde has access to Shamans. So already, by talking about Paladins, I am excluding probably half the player base, as it's a class that is not really relevant for the Horde side. But either way, today we're talking about the Paladin. Throughout this video, I will go over what abilities the Paladin has access to, which are relevant for hardcore, talk about the pros and cons of the class itself, who it's for, who it might not be for, and at the end we will also give it a rating, as usual, based on solo gameplay, group gameplay, and survival. Basically, an overall rating for the class based on hardcore gameplay. Hardcore servers in Classic WoW, shortly described and summarized, are servers where you only have one life, which means survival means pretty much everything. There's a sentence that I particularly think is very relevant to hardcore, and which also describes Paladins really well. Slow and steady wins the race. One huge downside of the Paladin class is a very obvious con in the pros and cons list is that it is a very slow class to play. You're basically an auto-attack machine with access to a couple of abilities outside of your auto-melee hits, but basically most of your abilities will burn through your mana very quickly, and you usually end up auto-melee hitting and using your mana for self-healing. That being said, as long as you are able to group up, Paladins they suddenly go from being a very slow class to being a very fast class, because they are probably the best support class in the game itself. Their blessings are insane, capable of increasing damage output, increasing mana regeneration rate, and even reducing threat. On top of that, they have protections for themselves and team members through Divine Shield and Blessing of Protection, and you even have healing abilities. For example, Paladins are incredible when paired with either a warrior or a rogue, classes that have really good damage output but lack that healing aspect, because this way you really play on each other's strength for incredible synergy. For the Paladin, let's talk about the abilities you have access to a little bit earlier, because to fully understand how good the Paladin can be for hardcore, I think it is important to talk about the importance of each ability that you have access to, so here we go. Blessing of Protection, allowing you to put yourself or a friendly target under a Blessing of Protection, protecting them from damage and allowing them to escape an otherwise very dangerous scenario. Divine Shield, the Paladin Bubble, allowing you to escape pretty much anything by bubbling and running away. This can be used in the open world or inside dungeons. It's basically a panic button or an oh shit button. The only thing is that it doesn't give you a guaranteed survival, it just gives you a head start, allowing you immunity to damage for a certain time period, which gives you additional time to figure out an escape plan, look through your bags for potions, or find an evade spot in a dungeon. A lot of hardcore deaths happen due to panic, and having this ability allows you to reduce that panic moment. Self-healing abilities like Flash of Light or Holy Light. Self-healing is incredibly important in hardcore where you only have one life. Any class with access to self-healing will have a huge advantage over a class with no self-healing. I feel like that's pretty obvious. You also have blessings, for example, Blessing of Might to increase your own and others' attack power. This is why Paladins are so good for dual leveling setups, because you get these blessings very early, buffing both of your damage outputs. It's also why they're so good inside dungeons, buffing every single member of the group. They can bless you with attack power, mana regen, threat reduction, but you also have access to other blessings like Blessing of Freedom and Blessing of Sacrifice. Lay on Hands, another oh shit button that you can use on yourself or a friendly target, instantly healing them for a massive amount. Hammer of Justice, a stun ability. This one can be used to stun a mob when it's about to cast a heavy hitting spell, or you can also use it to stun a mob. Then you can heal yourself while the mob is stunned, just as an example of why this ability can be useful. Summon Warhorse, giving you a free mount at level 40. Affording your mount at level 40 can actually be somewhat tricky, and many classes will need to not train all their spells in order to afford this mount as early as possible. As a Paladin, you get access to that level 40 mount for free. Since you get access to that mount for free, you can then afford to train all your spells while leveling, and not have to think too much about your personal wealth. All of these abilities combined should show you that the Paladin is pretty much built for survival, having access to that many abilities that are literally made to get out of dangerous scenarios, like Blessing of Freedom to escape slows, stuns to stun a mob, Bubble to literally become immune to damage, self-healing, a free mount. Paladins pretty much have it all. It is in fact a very good class to play for hardcore, and if I had to rank it for hardcore I probably would give it an S tier. All of this being said, you need to keep in mind that Paladins can be very slow to level up, especially if you play solo self-found, and while I do say that Paladins are a very good class to play, that auto-attack aspect and the class itself being very slow really needs to be stated. You also have the fact that you will most likely level up as Retribution, and you will most likely try to obtain Retribution gear while leveling to increase your throughput while leveling, but at max level you will pretty much be required to heal. Retribution Paladins are a meme, Protection Paladins are very subpar. The only really viable spec for you at max level is Holy, so you probably want to keep that in mind as well if you intend on raiding at max level. The Paladin class is a very good class choice for those of you who want to play a very safe class, and if you have the patience to auto-attack mobs. Also, make sure that if you are going to play this class at max level, you need to enjoy being a healer. On the other hand, if you prefer DPSing at max level, Paladins might not be the most optimal choice for you. With all of this being said, let's get into some ratings. For solo gameplay, Paladins are 5 out of 5 stars. Once again, I will put emphasis on this rating being purely based on hardcore servers, and they are slow and steady, so you need to be prepared for a slow but steady leveling experience. For group gameplay, Paladins are also 5 out of 5 stars. Being a hybrid class, you can effectively tank, heal or DPS alike, and throughout your leveling process you can fulfill any of these roles quite effectively. Additionally, you can help your group out by buffing them with blessings, allowing them to either generate less threat through your salvation blessing, or increasing their damage output through other blessings. Paladins are incredible to have in any group situation. Lastly, for survival, another 5 out of 5 stars. Having access to stuns, Blessing of Freedom, self-healing, Paladin Bubble, you name it, the Paladin has it. The only thing you really don't have, which would have made you even better, is a pet companion and a speed increase for your character, but you really don't even need those. A skilled Paladin can survive just about anything. Now it's time to talk about a surprisingly very strong class for classic WoW hardcore, the Rogue. When I first started playing hardcore classic WoW, I always thought Rogue and Warrior had to be the hardest classes to level up, considering they are melee classes with little to no self-healing options. That being said, after playing a lot of hardcore, I have started to realize rogues are a lot stronger than I actually thought, and they might actually be one of the best classes for hardcore. Now that statement obviously depends on a couple of factors, but I'll try to highlight why I think so during this video. Now this video itself will not be a deep dive on the rogue class itself, but is meant more as an overview of the class, the pros and cons of the class, who the class is for and who it might not be for, and we will also be looking at different abilities the rogue has access to that are useful in hardcore, as well as give it a rating based on how good it is for leveling, how good it is for dungeons, and how good it is in terms of survival. So let's get into it. Rogues, masters of the shadows, using stealth and crowd control to its advantage to master just about any scenario. This is a perfect class for those of you who want to be a melee DPS, but you still want to have access to tons of survivability and crowd control. It is basically a warrior, but with more survivability options, and a sprint and vanish plus stealth. That being said, you cannot tank. Rogues are actually an insane class for hardcore. We will go more into exactly which abilities you have access to later in this video, but you have access to stealth, for example, sprint, evasion and vanish, 4 massively helpful abilities that rogues get access to very early in the leveling process, which can help you escape many dangerous scenarios. On top of this, rogues have insane burst damage, making you capable of handling many dangerous scenarios as well. The combination of burst damage to take down mobs quickly, and also having ways to escape combat, is exactly what you want for a hardcore journey, where you only have one life. On top of this, rogues are very much wanted in level 60 content. You have access to lockpicking, which can open locked chests inside high level dungeons, and dungeons while leveling, as well as dungeons such as the Blackrock Depths, which actually usually requires a key in order to open the gate. A rogue can lockpick those gates instead, and in raids it's very common to stack warriors and rogues because they scale very well with gear and world buffs, so they can deal insane damage. So by picking a rogue, you are choosing a class that has very good leveling potential, a good damage dealer, and a high survivability class, and a class that is wanted for dungeons and raids, both while leveling and at the end game. A very good choice based on very many metrics. So let's get into some rogue abilities that are incredibly helpful in hardcore. First off, Vanish. This one is actually basically a get out of jail free card and can be used to escape combat. Keep in mind, Vanish can fail, so it's not a 100% fail-safe mechanic, but it's still very useful. So if you need to get out of a dangerous scenario, just Vanish, or if you just want to reset your threat on a mob really quickly, just once again Vanish. Next up, Evasion. This one increases your dodge rating for quite some time, a very good rogue defensive ability which you get access to very early, making rogues very strong for leveling from a very early level. Sprint. Not much to say here, but it's a movement speed increase, which you can use to get out of combat, and you can also talent this one to get out of CC. You can combine this one with a CC or a stun, and you can basically get out of any scenario, like for example, Gouge into Sprint. Speaking of Gouge, there is another ability you have access to, a crowd control / stun ability with many different use cases. Kidney Shot, another crowd control / stun ability, Cheap Shot, a stun opener, and Stealth, allowing you to stealth past mobs. This one is very useful while leveling, where you can skip past mobs and go straight for a named mob somewhere like in a cave or in a house. Blade Flurry. This one allows you to attack multiple mobs at the same time by cleaving your attacks from one mob to another. This ability is actually insanely useful, as Yuzu showcased on his stream while leveling WoW. You can target a red mob which usually would parry or dodge many of your attacks, but then you can actually use Blade Flurry and attack a lower named mob next to the red mob as well, because they're cleaving off of a lower level mob, and in this clip, Yuzu used this to kill a captain in Stranglethorn Vale, which was several levels higher than him. Next up, Adrenaline Rush, allowing you to absolutely crush your enemies in a huge burst of damage by increasing your damage output. This one can be combined with Blade Flurry for an insane cleave burst. You also have poisons, including instant damage, damage over time, and a slow effect from the crippling poison. Another huge ability for rogues is Blind, an effective way to crowd control an enemy. This can be used if you need to keep one mob occupied while dealing with another one, or if you just need to CC a mob for them to run away. Basically, it can be used in many different scenarios to help you out both offensively and defensively. The Rogue is a very good class to pick if you want to play a melee character, but also have access to a lot of survivability at the same time, and especially if you enjoy having lots of crowd control abilities at your disposal. The rogue has a pretty low skill floor, being very easy to play on a surface level, but also has a pretty high skill ceiling, especially when you're soloing content. A rogue can solo just about every mob as long as they are slowable, gougeable, and there's a line of sight opportunity. Basically, apply crippling poison, gouge the mob, then run behind a line of sight, kite with damage either by using thrown weapons, range attacks, or even deadly poison, and bleed effect through Rapture. With all this being said, let's get into some ratings. For solo gameplay, I give rogues 5 out of 5 stars. You have insane damage output, crowd control from gouge, blind, zap and kidney shot. You can kick enemy casts, and to top it all off, you have evasion, melee, you can evasion melee mobs attacks, and sprint away or even vanish if you realize you're about to die. For group gameplay, I also give rogues 5 out of 5 stars. They are wanted in groups from start to finish. While leveling, you will not really have a tough time finding a group as a rogue, as there's no reason not to bring a rogue. You have good damage output, both single target and AoE, and you bring crowd control options to dungeons plus the ability to open locked chests and also open locked doors. On top of this, rogues are also wanted in raiding setups at level 60 to a pretty high degree, helping justify that 5 out of 5 rating. For survivability, it's the same thing, 5 out of 5 stars. Sprint, blind, evasion, vanish. Rogues pretty much have it all except for bubble and self-healing, which they don't really need anyway because they have just about everything else. Vanish is probably going to be more useful than bubble in many cases. Let's say you are fighting a boss inside a cave and running out will take you 20 or 30 seconds. The Paladin will pull all the mobs on the way out and still die after his bubble duration, while the rogue can just stealth out after vanishing. All of this being said, even though I am technically rating the rogue overall 5 out of 5 stars, that does not mean I'm saying it is the easiest class to level for hardcore. I just think it might be the best based on those 3 criteria. For leveling, I still consider hunters to be both better and easier, but when you take everything into consideration, rogue is a very good choice. Let's talk about the Warlock in hardcore classic WoW. Throughout this video, I will give a brief summary on how good the Warlock is for hardcore classic WoW, an overview on the spells and abilities you have available and why they are useful, the pros and cons of playing a Warlock, and I will also give it a rating based on 3 criteria towards the end: solo gameplay, group gameplay, and survivability. So the first thing about playing a Warlock that most people will think about in regards to hardcore is having a demon available to fight by your side. This is an obvious huge advantage for the Warlock, having access to a Voidwalker, which is a personal tank which in return reduces your personal risk of dying while leveling in the open world. As long as you play safely and pull mobs one by one, you can easily solo any regular mob by just letting your Voidwalker keep the aggro, and you can deal damage through dot and wand while keeping your Voidwalker alive through health funnel. That being said, having this demon does not make you bulletproof. I've personally played a Warlock in hardcore classic WoW and it was incredibly safe, until it wasn't. I went into a cave and had to do a quest where I had to summon multiple mobs, and it was impossible to do mobs one by one, and it ended up with me panicking and dying because up until this point it had been pretty safe being a Warlock. There are also some mobs in the open world that are immune to taunt effects, rendering your Voidwalker pretty much useless. Like many mechanical enemies in the open world will straight up ignore taunt effects, and some of them are also immune to fear effects while also being immune to taunt, which can be very scary. Now let's get into some abilities the Warlock has available, which is really helpful in hardcore. Fear. This ability is a double-edged sword, but in 99% of scenarios, it is incredibly useful. You can, for example, send your Voidwalker on one mob, fully dot that mob with Corruption, Immolate and Agony, then pull a second mob and fully dot that mob, for then to fear it away, and the mob will die during that fear through those damage over time effects. On top of this, you can pull a third mob and face tank it with Drain Life, effectively allowing you to kill 3 mobs in the same time it takes to kill one singular mob, making you incredibly efficient in terms of leveling speed. Fear can also be used as a defensive mechanic. Let's say you pulled an elite mob you did not want to pull, simply fear it and run away. Summon Imp, summon Voidwalker, and summon Incubus. Basically, summoning a demon. Different demons are useful in different scenarios. Voidwalkers are very useful if you want to play it as safe as possible and pull mobs 1 by 1 or 2 by 2, while the Imp and Succubus offer more damage and crowd control, allowing you to go a little bit more crazy. Howl of Terror and AoE Fear ability, pretty useful as well. Death Coil, an ability you get in the mid-40s, which is incredibly helpful, allowing you a short duration but instant cast Fear effect, which also heals you. This can be used as a defensive ability where you don't want to risk casting Fear, but need an oh shit button to hit in order to survive. Let's say you are on 10% health with one mob on you, and casting Fear could result in you dying during the cast duration. You can just use Death Coil instead. Siphon Life, this ability is available through the Affliction talent tree, and is incredibly useful no matter your playstyle. It offers a heal over time and damage over time effect, siphoning life from the enemy to yourself, allowing for more life taps and bigger pulls. Soul Link, this ability is available from the Demonology talent tree and offers a way to transfer damage taken by the player to instead be taken by the demon, plus it also increases damage dealt by both you and your demon. Fellow Domination, an incredible talent for survival in hardcore, and this is a must in my opinion for hardcore as a Warlock. Even when speccing into Affliction, I still put enough points into Demonology to get this ability. It's pretty early in the talent tree. Combined with the Master Summoner talent, this one offers a near instant demon summon, so if your first Voidwalker dies, you can summon a new one right away without the usual 10-second cast timer. Curse of Exhaustion, this one isn't really worth spending too much time talking about. It is the regular slow effect, but it requires 5 talent points in order to actually be effective, as it's a 10% movement speed decrease plus another 5% per talent point spent into the improved talent, for a maximum of 30% slow effect by wasting 5 talent points into it. But it's your only slow effect as a Warlock, so take it or leave it. When it comes to talents, you are very free to play around with whatever you personally want to use, but I'm gonna highlight 2 builds right here. The Demonology build, which is useful for those of you who want to play the game as safe as possible, and want to have a very tanky Voidwalker by your side, and prefer using the Voidwalker over any other demon. Next up, the Drain Life tanking build, which is just as useful for survival as the Demonology build, but it's more based on you being the tank and maximizing your personal survival through face tanking a mob while channeling Drain Life. Which build fits your playstyle really depends on your gameplay style preference. You could also spec deep into Affliction and focus more on damage over time effects, rather than Drain Life if you want to pump maximum damage and care more about your throughput than your survival. So let's get into some ratings. Solo gameplay, I give Warlocks 4 out of 5 stars. You have a lot of abilities at your service. You can fare self-healing through Drain Life, permanent healing potions through health stones, a personal tank through the Voidwalker, fare to get out of dangerous scenarios, you lack some crowd control, you don't have any movement speed increase ability, and your enemy slowing ability is a little bit scuffed. On top of this, you don't really have an oh shit button like a Hunter's Feign Death, Rogue Vanish, or Paladin Bubble. The best you really have is Death Coil and maybe the Voidwalker Sacrifice. Group gameplay, what did I just say? Group gameplay, I'm actually going to put it at the same place, 4 out of 5 stars. I was even going to say 3, but having the ability to summon puts them up to 4. Survivability, also 4 out of 5, referring back to having a demon tank, health stones, fear, and Voidwalker Sacrifice. You are usually pretty safe while leveling, but lacking the ability to vanish, feign death, or bubble, plus lacking movement speed. And based on this, the overall rating is also going to be 4 out of 5 stars. I will add that Warlock is a very good class to choose for a first character in hardcore, because as long as you play it safe, it is a very safe class. Having access to a demon tank is a huge advantage over many other classes, making it the perfect entry class for anyone wondering which class to play, there's also a pretty big demand for Warlocks at max level, as they are used a lot in raiding setups, and people always want that summon ability for group and raid setups, so by choosing a Warlock, you are picking a class that is both good for leveling, and you know there is a demand for it at the end game. So there it is. Hopefully this showed you some of the pros and cons of the Warlock class in hardcore, more of an introduction than a deep dive really, showing off the most important abilities and the pros and the cons of the class itself. So let's talk about warriors in classic WoW hardcore. This is the class that everyone keeps referring to as the true hardcore challenge, based on it being arguably the most difficult class to level in a solo environment. Once again, we are going to look at the pros and the cons of this class, and which abilities it has available that could help out while playing hardcore, and give the class a rating based on solo gameplay, group gameplay, and survivability. This is not supposed to be a deep dive, but more of a surface overview, going over the general feeling of the class and what to expect. So let's get into it. Warriors are the true giga chance of the classic WoW hardcore challenge. You have little to no self-healing available, you don't have any sprint, evasion, vanish, feign death or bubble. It is just you, your weapon and the enemy. Warriors deal damage through auto attacks and abilities. Now abilities, they also cost rage, and rage is generated through either being attacked or attacking mobs. The actual divide depends on which warrior stance you are currently in, but basically you get rage for getting attacked and attacking. This means the more mobs you pull and the more damage you deal, the more rage you build, and the more damage you can then pump out. That being said, as a warrior with only one life, you have to be incredibly careful with how many mobs you pull, and this affects how much damage you can deal as well, so it just makes the class way more difficult because you simply can't take full advantage of your class's toolkit. From level 1 to level 30, you usually want to just pull one mob at a time. Often pulling more than one mob can mean actual death, or at least lead to a very sketchy scenario. When you get sweeping strikes, you can start pulling 2 mobs at a time if you're feeling a bit cheeky, and you want to upgrade the efficiency while pulling. Now from an early level, you will want to start pooling rage from one pull to another one. Basically, you can kill an easy mob to get full rage then charge straight into another mob to pump damage while you have full rage from the start of the fight. While leveling, you will probably want to try to go for as many green colored quests and mobs as available and as possible, and try to stay between 3 and 5 levels above your current content as often as possible. For example, Red Ridge Mountains on the Alliance side offers some level 20 quests. As a warrior, I would recommend being level 25 before doing those quests, because you're still getting full experience values from doing quests that are 5 levels below your personal level. The bigger the level gap is between you and the mob you're fighting, the more damage you will deal to that target, and the higher the chance you have of dealing a critical strike, and the lower the chance the mob has to parry your attack. The same thing goes the other way around. If you fight a mob that is several levels higher than you, that mob will have a higher chance of dealing a critical strike against you, and it will have a higher chance to parry your attacks. So try to stay 3 to 5 levels above any mob you're fighting at any times if possible. So let's have a look at some warrior abilities that are actually worth mentioning here. Number 1, Battle Shout. This is a self buff, increasing your attack power, and that's pretty much it. Execute, allowing you to finish off a fight as soon as possible, and Thunderclap, increasing the time between attacks by 10% for enemies, which can be quite helpful in survival. Next up, the biggest one, Hamstring, arguably the most important abilities for warriors in hardcore, allowing you to hamstring kite mobs. This can be used for several reasons in different scenarios, like you could hamstring kite an elite while using Throne to keep the leash, then only go melee combat when you need to refresh your hamstring, and you can pump some damage at the same time. Or you can use hamstring kiting to trade melee hits with your enemy at a rate of 1-to-1. Some mobs have a very fast attack speed in the open world, so if you stay in melee range 24/7, the mob might attack you 3 times for every single attack you make. By kiting the mob around your melee swing timer, you can make sure you trade 1 attack for 1 attack. And lastly, you can use hamstring as a survival ability to get away from mobs. Mortal Strike. This one is actually way better than it might look like, as a lot of mobs in the open world will have a self-healing effect, and Mortal Strike will reduce that healing significantly. Like, you have casters in the open world, actual healers that will cast a healing ability, and you have tons of murlocs that will try to chug a healing potion. The warriors also have access to fear through Intimidating Shout. This will be a double-edged sword, as feared mobs can run into more mobs and make an already dangerous scenario or situation even worse, so use it at your own risk. Now, one big upside to being a warrior is that you have the ability to tank. This makes you very much wanted throughout the entire leveling process, and you need to be prepared to get whispered every single time you go online about tanking some dungeon. People need tanks constantly for dungeons while leveling, so as a warrior you're playing a class that is in high demand, and not only are warriors in high demand for dungeons while leveling, but they are also in high demand at level 60. If you've seen any raiding setups in Classic WoW, no matter which raid tier, there's a lot of warriors in the raid group. Warriors are being stacked because they can deal insane damage, so there will always be a demand for warriors both while leveling and at the end game. And because warriors are quite a pain to level up, I think it is important to have that light at the end of the tunnel and something to look forward to. And I'll say this, warriors might start off weak, but they get better and better for every single level, and they reach their peak at max level. Now, while warriors might not be the best class for individual gameplay due to lack of self-healing and lack of escape options, and a pretty bad survival toolkit overall, they are absolutely insane for group gameplay, where they have access to support classes and healers. This makes warriors go from 0 to hero if you're doing a dungeon, because while you feel weak and have to pull mobs one by one while questing, everything changes when you're in a group and have a healer by your side. Referring back to warriors' baseline rage generation mechanic, the more damage you deal and the more damage you take, the more rage you build up, allowing you to pump out even more damage. It's basically a snowball function, and you just need to get the snowball rolling, and it compounds on itself. So let's get into some ratings. For solo gameplay, warriors get a 2 out of 5 star rating. I probably should put them at 1 out of 5 because they are going to be the lowest rated class in this category, but I simply can't bring myself to give any class a 1 out of 5, especially considering warriors do actually have access to hamstring and intimidating shout. Now, for group gameplay, warriors suddenly jump up to a 5 out of 5. They are arguably the best tank possible with incredibly threat generation and survival utility through going defensive stance with a shield mid-combat, and they are also incredible damage dealers if allowed to pump massive damage. For survivability, once again it's going to be a 2 out of 5. Lack of self-healing and being a melee class with no speed increase can really be tough. The only upsides are once again hamstring and intimidating shout. As a quick summary, warriors might be the most difficult class to play when you're playing solo, but as long as you're able to group up, it suddenly goes from 0 to hero, and it becomes absolutely incredible. It's also a very safe choice if you're thinking about level 60 gameplay, and as long as you can suffer through the leveling journey, it will all be worth it at the end. You scale incredibly well with the gear, but you also need to take advantage of professions like cooking for food buffs and first aid for self-healing, and make sure to use hamstring kiting to your advantage. With the upcoming official hardcore servers, it is time to show some love to the priest class. Priests are one of the most underrepresented and most in-demand classes you will find in Classic WoW, and in hardcore, the demand for priests is simply going to go up even more. One question a lot of people ask themselves when choosing a class is, will my class be in demand, and will I be invited to raids? and by playing a priest, you can rest assured that you'll be wanted for endgame content, and your class is indeed in high demand. In this video, we'll go through the pros and cons of playing a priest in hardcore classic WoW, who the class itself might be suitable for, and at the end we will also give the class a rating based on 3 important metrics: solo gameplay, group gameplay, and survivability. The aim with that rating is to give you an indicator on how good the class actually can be, and to help you make your decision on whether or not to play a priest a little bit easier. So let's talk about the priest. The priest is a very good choice for those of you looking to play a fairly good class with healing abilities. As a priest, your leveling process will be what I personally refer to as slow and steady. You do have some pumper possibilities, but for the most part, you'll be killing mobs one by one, and it provides a very chill leveling experience. Having access to the so-called wand spec for priests, you deal increased damage with wands, so you will basically be wanding down target. Use some mana to pump damage, then wand to finish off targets, while letting your mana regeneration start ticking, and then heal yourself when necessary. Once you unlock the new Mind Flay at the early level 40s, you can even start switching over to Shadow specialization to deal even more damage, but in return you will also use more mana to deal that damage. So you pretty much have a choice here. You can either pull more mobs and burn mana to burn them down quickly, and then go for a mana break, or you can pull the mobs one by one and still use wanding. The first one offers more pumpage and more risky gameplay, and in return also offers the possibility of slightly more efficiency, while killing mobs one by one is very safe, but also pretty slow. Now to begin with, as a priest you are pretty much chosen as a healer. You might level as Shadow, but at max level, Shadow is mostly a meme spec. At the end game, as a priest, if you truly want to be in high demand, that demand is from being a healer. But you also have to remember, official hardcore servers are servers where your character only has 1 life, which means you will need even more healers than before for raids, and even in regular classic WoW, priests were already in pretty high demand, and for hardcore servers, this demand will be even better. Not only are priests very good healers, they are also very good at preventing death by mechanics that would otherwise kill you. What I mean by this is that any healer can heal a target after it has taken damage, but priests have a unique way of healing by preventing damage taken, through for example Power Word Shield, which can save you from a mechanic that would otherwise deal damage equals to 100% of your original health value. One of the very obvious upsides and pros of playing and leveling a priest in hardcore is having access to these healing abilities. When you only have 1 life, having a way to heal yourself is incredibly valuable. So, with all of this being said, let's take a look at some of the priest abilities that I personally think are worth highlighting for hardcore. Flash heal and self-healing abilities, helping you stay alive. Renew, don't really know how to say that one, but it's a heal over time that you can throw on yourself to generate some health either while in combat or right after combat, basically just a heal over time. Stamina buff, this one is actually quite important, giving you a bigger health pool which also allows you to take more damage before it becomes dangerous. Psychic Scream, useful if you need to fear mobs away from you in order to get away. Now make sure to use this ability extremely carefully, as feared mobs can run into more mobs and end up pulling more mobs on top of you, making a dangerous situation even more dangerous and causing absolute chaos. Personally, I would only use this ability when you have a complete control over your surroundings, or if you need to fear the mobs away from you in order to survive. You also have Shadow Form, useful if you plan to level up as a Shadow Priest, which a lot of people do after level 40. Shadow Form will increase your damage dealt and also reduce your damage taken, so this form is actually quite useful for survival, but you also cannot use holy spells while in Shadow Form. But you can simply macro holy spells to cancel out Shadow Form before casting, and it's GG easy. Mind Flay, dealing shadow damage over time in a drain channeling type of spell, as it's a 3-second channel ability. Now, while Mind Flaying, the mob will also be slowed down, allowing for some kiting possibilities. Shadow Word Pain, a damage over time ability which further improves the priest's kiting ability, while also dealing damage while kiting. A key mechanic for priests in the early game is to use fence kiting to your advantage and burn down mobs through Shadow Word Pain, and if you care about speed leveling at all, that is the biggest tip that I can personally give you. Use fence kiting and ledge kiting to your advantage, pull 2 to 3 to 4 mobs in one pull, and then just jump back and forth and kite them around while burning them down with damage over time. You also get Shadow Weaving from a talent, increasing the shadow damage you deal to the target by 3% per stack, up to 5 stacks for 15% increased damage. You also have Spirit Tap, another passive ability from a talent, giving you a 100% bonus to your spirit after killing a target that yields experience, so obviously pretty useful while leveling, and also allowing your mana to regenerate at 50% while casting. This is incredibly powerful while leveling as it compiles on top of itself, and the faster you kill mobs the more uptime you will have on mana regen, allowing for less downtime and more chain pulling. And also one specialization, another passive ability from a talent that is incredibly boring but also incredibly effective. This will increase your damage output by a lot, and it will also increase your damage output without using mana, which as a caster is pretty important to be able to deal as much damage as possible, while preserving your mana to spend it in times where you really need to. It is also worth highlighting Power Infusion and Vampiric Embrace, although they might not be the most insane abilities specifically for hardcore, they are indeed abilities that are important to the priest class and showcase how good the class can be, both solo and in group dynamics. All of these abilities should show that the priest actually has quite a few abilities at its disposal that are quite strong for survival, but there are two main things that priests are lacking. Number 1, a hunter pet, or a pet companion basically, like a hunter or warlock that has a personal tank, and number 2, a movement speed increasing ability. On top of that, they also lack long-term slows for enemies outside of a channeled ability, and they also lack stun abilities. But with that being said, let's get into some ratings. For solo gameplay, priests get a 4 out of 5 stars. A good priest can put up this to 5 out of 5, and a bad priest would put this down to 2 out of 5. But for most priests, I think 4 out of 5 is roughly where you're going to be. Having access to healing abilities and decent damage output already by itself puts you in a pretty good situation, especially as long as you understand your class limits and don't try to be a mage pulling 20 mobs in one pull when you are in fact a priest. Priest leveling is actually incredibly chill, and it should never be dangerous or difficult unless you make a mistake that makes it scary. For group gameplay, priest jumps up to 5 out of 5 stars by being the best healer in the game, arguably, being able to prevent damage before it's being dealt, which can literally save lives from abilities that would otherwise result in certain death, and as a healer you will be in high demand all the time, and finding groups will be incredibly easy. For survival, back down to 4 out of 5, possibly 3, but I'm gonna give it 4. Having healing abilities is nice, and having Psychic Scream can definitely be helpful. Shadow Form reduces damage taken, but once again, you do lack movement speed increase, or a way to slow down mobs over time without channeling. You lack stuns, Paladin Bubble, or even a Hunter Pet or a Warlock Demon. You could even argue that for survival, Priest could be a 3 out of 5, but personally, I think considering all of the abilities that you do actually have access to, a 4 out of 5 star rating does sound fair. Now, if you've played a Priest in Hardcore Classic WoW, make sure to leave your tips and tricks in the comments down below. So there it is, an overview of every single class in the game. Hopefully this helped you pick your class for the hardcore service for Classic WoW, and with that being said, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and let me know in the comments down below if you actually watched the entire thing. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.